Thank you so much for joining us tonight. The High Desert Food and Farm Alliance is putting on this panel discussion on small-scale farming and water use in the Deschutes Basin. If you're not familiar with HDFFA, we're a nonprofit with the mission of supporting a healthy and thriving food and farm network in Central Oregon through education, collaboration, and inclusivity. We believe that everyone deserves good food and that our food connects us. My name is Chantel Welch. I'm a program director at HDFFA, and I will be moderating the panel today with great help from Andy Nichols, who pulled all the information for me together. So we'll get started here. As most of you already know, Central Oregon and much of the United States West are and have been experiencing unprecedented drought conditions, compounded by multiple severe heat waves. You might have heard of this heat dome this year is kind of the new term going around. This drought is leading to drier lands and less water, which is greatly impacting farmers and ranchers across our region. With this in mind, we've asked a panel of experts to join us to discuss the impacts of the current drought on small-scale food producers in the Deschutes Basin. For reference, the Deschutes Basin starts in the lakes of the Cascade Mountains and flows into the Columbia River on the Oregon-Washington border. So to start, each panelist will have an opportunity to discuss their work and share insight on the topic of drought and water allocation. After we've introduced and heard from each panelist, we will open up the discussion with prepared questions, and attendees will be able to pose questions by putting them into the chat, and then Annie will pull those over into the sheet that I'm reading from. We'll do our best to get to everything that we can today. I'll introduce each panelist one by one and have them speak to their work before I move on to the next panelist. So to start, I'm going to start with Shon Ray. Shon is the Managing Deputy Director for the Central Oregon Irrigation District, and I will go ahead and hand off to you to talk about your work.
Kelly, what have you done?
Hi, Chantel and everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join you tonight. I think this is very timely, as we'd had a discussion with somebody who came to our board meeting recently, interested in educating some of our small farmers on what we are doing. Central Oregon Irrigation District is doing to help with the drought. As maybe many of you know, or maybe you don't know, Central Oregon Irrigation District holds senior water rights. And what that means essentially is we sort of get first rights on live flow, so natural flow of the Deschutes River. And then Mike will be speaking later about junior water rights and how that affects him. But for COID and actually the Deschutes Basin Board of Control, which consists of 8 irrigation districts, we've been working on an HCP for 12 years, I believe. I think it's been 12 years. And it just finally got signed at the end of last year, beginning of this year, which is amazing feat, quite frankly. And I think there's some misconceptions about the HCP and it causing the drought, which is not true. We would be in a drought whether there was a frog or an HCP. And honestly, it probably is and is intended to protect or give us things that we can expect instead of, endangered species just coming in and taking the water. There's expectations. We're mitigating for any take that we would have, and again is here to protect the districts and protect the frog as well and the other endangered species. And so in tangent with that, Central Oregon Irrigation District, it's been about 5-6 years ago, we started with a capital improvement plan. And really the goal of that was to make a plan to modernize our district. Our district really hasn't had a ton of modernization. It's 120 years old. We're still delivering water through open canals, which some think are beautiful, and they are, but I think it's time for a change, and this drought is definitely showing people that we just don't have water like we used to, and we need it's important that we conserve it and share it with everybody that needs it. So part of that that plan is really kind of coincides with the habitat conservation plan and some of the water that we need to make available so we can basically restore the river and protect the frog further. So with us piping, Central Oregon Irrigation District, on average, through all of its canals, it's a 25% loss. We have areas that are up to 50% loss. You know, we just don't have very good soils for holding water. There's some evaporation as well. So sort of capturing those losses in our operational water, it takes a lot of volume to get water pushed through an open earth canal versus in a pipe. And just as an example, we just finished the first year of our phase 1 project on the J lateral, and normally when we would turn on the water, it would take 4 to 5 hours for the water to travel down that piece of ditch, and it's completely piped now, and it took 45 minutes. So you can imagine our ability to manage water in a 45-minute period versus a 5-hour period. So if somebody doesn't down that ditch before, if they wanted to turn their water off and we shut it off, you know, at the beginning of the J lateral, or God forbid we did it at the river, it could take a week or more for them to get that water. So it doesn't make it very easy for us to manage, you know, the on and off, I guess, of irrigation. So piping is critical. Not only to that, but it is critical to, I believe, and we believe, to the on-farm and small laterals, because that allows us to back that water up and not need it. Once we have the main lateral piped, we can take those small laterals and get some on-farm. And when a farm has the ability to turn the faucet on and turn the faucet off, they're not going to leave the faucet on. They're going to, when they don't need the water, they're going to shut it off. Whereas now, if the water's been released, there's no place for it to go. So maybe into a pond, but it's just not super efficient. So that water then just gets backed up in the system and eventually doesn't get diverted because they're not using it. There have been other districts that are fully piped, and they are reporting, you know, about 30% saved just on farm use, just because of their ability to turn it on and turn it off. And again, with you know, future pressurization, we'll get rid of pumps, you know, saving electricity. So we feel it's a win-win, and all of our conserved water will be transferred to junior districts, primarily North Unit Irrigation District, so they can basically take our live flow, the amount that we've conserved, and then they would release that amount in the winter, so it would level out the flows in the winter. So the Deschutes River in the summer, we open up the floodgate and it rushes a bunch of water out. And then in our past history, it kind of in the wintertime when irrigation season was over, that river would get shut off for storage, and, you know, creating some long-term issues for the Deschutes River. You know, we're already releasing 100 CFS in the winter, when it was, I think previously was getting down to 20 or 25% or 20 CFS that was released in the winter time. As soon as this phase 1 project is finished, which will be spring of this coming year, there will be an additional 30 CFS. So we will then transfer to North Unit, and they will then release, you know, instead of 100, it'll be 130. So as soon as we get these projects done, all the conservation, you know, we will incrementally increase the amount that that is being given to North Unit. On farm, I mean, we have so many things going on. I think I don't know if Kate's going to talk about on farm, but we've partnered with the DRC and SWCD also, but we have a bunch of on farm stuff going on. I'll leave that for Kate, because I think that's probably what she's really here to talk about. But a lot of those grants are COID grants that DRC is managing for us. So with that, I think I'll stop and let somebody else talk.
Thank you so much. And we do have a question or two that we've prepared that do reference grants and what's available for small scale farmers. So we'll make sure that gets covered. Next, I will introduce Mike Britton. Mike is the General Manager for the North Unit Irrigation District. You might hear it referred to as NUID. Tonight, Mike has been serving in this role since 2008. He's also the Vice President of the Deschutes Basin Board of Control, where he helped develop the Habitat Conservation Plan.
Thanks, everybody. I recognize a lot of names and some of the faces on the screen here and appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Shon did a very good job covering a lot of ground in a short period of time. So I may not take the full 10 minutes that was allotted me, but correction, I'm the outgoing general manager at North Unit Irrigation District. So we have a new manager, Josh Bailey, who some of you have met in various circles so far, but he'll be the fellow stepping in and taking over the reins here, probably more so in the next couple months and into the future than he is today. But for North Unit, we're the second largest irrigation district in the state of Oregon. We're the largest in the Deschutes Basin. We're nearly 60,000 acres of, we're still predominantly ag land or agricultural producing lands. Unlike some of the other districts in the basin that are more urbanized, we're still very rural and very ag oriented. As Shon mentioned, we are the junior water right holder in the basin. That means that we're the last to get kind of the water that's left over. We do have a storage facility that is Wickiup Reservoir with a capacity of 200,000 acre feet. And that is our main supply of water during years like this. Some years when there is enough natural flow in the river, Deschutes River, to go around, Wickiup doesn't get used or pulled down quite as much as you've seen in the past few years. So in good water years, there's plenty of natural flow to go around usually, and Wickiup can end the season at a decent level versus empty or near empty each year. North Unit also has a pumping facility on the Crooked River, and we have a 200 CFS water right on the Crooked River that we use year in and year out. But for the most part, the last couple of years, we've really used those pumps to try and make it through these seasons. The Crooked River Basin is in just as bad or worse shape actually than the Deschutes Basin with regard to the drought and what the drought brings. Ochoco Reservoir is very low, almost empty. And if you look at Prineville Reservoir, it's around 45,000 acre feet, I think, and that's probably historic lows for this time of year for both reservoirs, and likely also Wickiup Reservoir is also at record lows. Crane Prairie is a reservoir that has water in it for CYD, or used to have water in it for CYD, Arnold, and Lone Pine. Once the HCP was finalized, a large chunk of Crane Prairie Reservoir was turned over to frog. So there's a big bucket of water that remains in Crane Prairie Reservoir to maintain frog habitat year in and year out. And then what's on top of that gets spread out over 3 months, beginning in mid-July to the end of the irrigation season, down to, I want to say 37,000 acre feet and some change. So there's been a lot of hydrologic changes in the basin within the last few years, and not just because of drought, but because of new reservoir and river operations as a result of a lawsuit won, the HCP, and the need to maintain habitats for fish and frogs. As Shon said, the Habitat Conservation Plan was a 12-year process that pretty much took up 12 years of my career here at North Unit, and it was finalized December 31st of last year. And this is the first year that we've begun implementation of the HCP, and it just so happens to coincide with one of the worst droughts on record. So we've heard a lot of people complain about the HCP and the frog and what it's done to everybody, but the reality is it's the drought is what is hurting us today. If it was just the frog, I think we would be okay. If it was just the drought, I think we would be okay. But the drought we're in now and the requirements for the frog through the HCP has really been detrimental, at least to North Unit and a couple other districts in the basin. As Shon said, they're senior water right holders. They've been impacted, but not to the extent that, for example, North Unit or Arnold have. Arnold and North Unit are junior. Arnold went off completely, I think it was last week, Shon, last Friday or Saturday, and they'll be off till probably sometime in October. We're anticipating with the amount of water that we have left in Wickyup and some other water that we're picking up here and there that we will essentially be out of water, at least in Wickyup around August 20th. So the district here will be out of water 2 or 3 days after that. Once the natural flow is the only thing flowing in the Deschutes River, that's when we'll be completely out of water at our diversion in Bend. Projects, we since I joined the district in 2008, we've been putting pipe in the ground every year, except one year we didn't get a grant for some reason. I don't recall what the reason was, but we've been able to put in miles and miles of pipe here in the district. And for those that are familiar with our district, we have a different soil type where we don't have the losses that you see in other districts around Bend and Redmond. Our soil is not as porous. Ours is a little more loamy type of soil, so it holds moisture better, unlike other areas where it pretty much just flows right through. So really our big benefit in piping in our district is to provide pressurized water to our patrons. Our water users are probably, if not the most efficient water users in the basin, they are in the state. We get by on 2 acre-feet per acre or less. And the need for our farmers to get by on less has necessitated on having the most efficient systems that they can possibly put together, whether that's pivots or wheel lines or sprinklers or micro sprinklers. Each year there's a new technology that comes out, it seems like, and our guys are taking advantage of those opportunities whenever they can. This year, unless you've been living under a rock, there's a lot of stories in the newspaper about our water shortage and how it's come about. We began the season by giving our farmers 1 acre-foot per acre, and that was based on 100+% snowpack in the upper Deschutes Basin. We had a fair reservoir level. I won't say great. It was probably one of the worst on record, but not the worst. And we actually anticipated having more than enough water to meet our needs, but also have some carryover. But as the snow melt came, we didn't see it show up in the reservoirs. And as the summer has progressed, the drought has actually gotten worse, as has water supplies. You probably all saw an article in the paper the other day about the headwaters of the Metolius is half of what it was a few years ago. And if there's any kind of signal that shows that we're into either a prolonged drought or a significant shortage of snow and snow melt and runoff and absorption into the tributaries and the aquifers, that's a perfect example of how things are going and have been the last few years here in the basin. So we gave our guys 1 acre-foot with an anticipation of some carryover. As the season progressed, we knew that wasn't going to work. We actually reduced the amount of water that our farmers could use 1/10, so they had 0.90 acre-feet per acre of water to use here in the district. And as time went on, things got worse and we actually reduced their allocation again. So if you're a farmer in March or April of 2021, you plan for 1 acre foot of water and you get through the season and it's June or July, and then all of a sudden you are cut on the amount of water you have. That creates a lot of problems, not just for the district, but for individual water users and patrons as well, because they've planned out their season for a certain amount of water. So having another cut not long after that really hurt our guys. And it came down to the point where they've had to just let crops and fields wither and die because there wasn't enough water to keep them going. So we've been working closely with everybody, trying to find creative ways to stretch our water. And we've made some unpopular decisions, but those decisions have been good decisions in my mind that allowed us to extend the water season a little farther than if we had just continued to run the way we are. So that's probably a story that'll be playing out in the media for quite some time. We've asked the governor for some financial relief for our water users and patrons that have invested time and money and energy into their crops that are not going to make it out of the field. And we've also been working with our federal delegation, Oregon delegation, on those same very issues. And I know there's probably some people on the meeting here tonight that have or will be feeling the effects of drought, whether it's here or in CUID or any other district. We've been working closely with CUID and other districts in the basin to come up with creative ways to share water between the districts. And as Shon mentioned, as they do conservation projects in CUID, North Unit Irrigation District becomes the beneficiary of that natural flow, which is a senior flow, which is good. And then in exchange, part of the HCP commitment is that we release a commensurate amount of water in the winter for the frog. So we get 30 in the summer and the frog gets 30 in the winter. So North Unit and CUID have been working, boy, at least 6-7 years, trying to find ways, again, creative ways to share water between the districts. And this year has really been a challenge for everybody and not just North Unit. And fortunately, CUID has been able to find water occasionally that they can share with the junior users here in the basin. Lastly, and not because of the drought, but we had actually started looking at a project at Lake Billy Chinook where we would be able to pump water out of Lake Billy Chinook. And what we would essentially be doing is moving our Crooked River pump station down to Lake Billy Chinook. And what that does, among other things, is frees up the river with no impediments from Opal Springs at the confluence of Lake Billy Chinook all the way up to Prineville Reservoir. And right now, if you were to look at the Crooked River, there's actually dry sections of the Crooked River today. And there's just no water. I mean, plain and simple. There's water in the reservoir. It's got it's contracted water. It's water for irrigation, and there is some fish and wildlife water in Prineville Reservoir, but they are holding on to that for winter releases. So as I mentioned, it's not good anywhere, but we believe this Lake Billy Chinook project has untold benefits. It'll supply a reliable, sustainable source of water for our farmers. It'll be pumped up out of Lake Billy Chinook into the district, into Haystack Reservoir, and then regulated out of Haystack Reservoir, which serves about 65% of our district. So we would still be using Deschutes water, but at a much lesser need than what we have today. And through this project, it would actually help balance the rivers more than you see today. As Shon mentioned, also there's fluctuations summer, winter, even during the summer, and then likewise on the Crooked River, there's a lot of times that the water is there one day and then it's gone the next. So we believe this project will help resolve some of those issues, among others. So that's something we're pretty excited about. It's a very heavy lift. It's about a $400 million project the way it sits today. And we've begun doing the groundwork on it. When I say groundwork, we're not breaking ground on the project, but we've actually started talking to our delegation about the project. There's supposedly, $1 trillion infrastructure packages coming out that might be able to help us advance the project. And, we believe that with those types of opportunities, as far-fetched as the project may seem, we believe that there's actually a good opportunity now to get a project like that done. And as we all know, disaster and catastrophe provides opportunity. And, I think the drought has provided a natural disaster and it could be quite a catastrophe, at least in Jefferson County. So we're trying to find the silver lining in the dark cloud, and hopefully this is it. With that, I will stop and turn it over to whoever's next.
Thank you, Mike. Next up, I'll introduce Todd Peplin. Todd is the program's lead for the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. He holds a bachelor's degree in soil sciences with a minor in agricultural science from Montana State and spent 30 years working for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. He now offers conservation planning and technical assistance through SWCD to private landowners and land managers.
Great. Thank you for having me tonight. Thank you, Andy, for inviting me. I have a slide presentation. Oh, it's already up. How about that? That I kind of prepared for just on groups like this. Most often what I do is I start out, because we are a group, boots on the ground type of organization. And in some aspects, we're the best kept secret. And nobody really knows or has some inclining about what does a soil water conservation does. I'm with the Deschutes Soil Water Conservation District, so most of my talk is going to be right around what we're doing in Deschutes County. There is Jefferson County SWCD. They service everybody in Jefferson County, and I think Mike knows them really well. They've been helping out with their piping projects. And then there's the Crooked Soil Water Conservation District in Prineville, and they've done some work with COID over there in Powell Butte area, and also a lot of the range work up in Beaver Creek and all. If I can have the next slide, my big presentation here, I just love doing this because it just gives a little bit of a history about soil water conservation districts. Way back when you had the Dust Bowl days of 1934, where all of a sudden we had Hugh Bennett on the Congress floor, and there was this big cloud of dust coming into Washington, D.C., which prompted something that was a monumental feat of Roosevelt to start looking into this and how we can control erosion. At that time, Roosevelt put out the Soil Erosion Service, which basically was a government entity trying to work with private landowners, and it became the Soil Water Erosion came to be the Conservation Service, Soil Water Conservation Service. But as you know, that trying to let government tell a farmer what to do is another thing. And so what was enacted was trying to push for soil water conservation districts throughout the nation, and asked each governor to have a soil water conservation district in each county. And at that time, in '39, Oregon actually adopted that ruling. And what soil water conservation districts are, they're a quasi-government, if you will. You elect board members every year or every 2 years, depending upon how the district is set up. We are not environmental group. We work with hand in hand with our constituents and our agricultural folks. And we help them out doing, looking at issues that they're having resource-wide. Next slide. So what does the Conservation SWCD do? And it's just that. We just provide local leadership. We work with private landowners. We work with them addressing the resource concerns. People will call us up about, in this case, you know, water issues. What can we do to improve our farming operation? Education, we partner up very well with OSU and other local entities in providing education and outreach to folks. And also we have some fund sources that also will help out private landowners to at least implement what they would like to see on the ground. So how do we do this and all? If we get our next slide there, this is really interesting because when the Soil Water Conservation District looks at their long-range plan annually, we kind of look at what the demographics is, and especially in Deschutes County, we start looking at, you know, what is our land use? Has it changed? What is the, you know, the crops that we're growing here? There's some really interesting things in Deschutes County, which may or may not be surprising to some folks. Deschutes County happens to be a lovely place that everybody likes to go to. And the growth in Deschutes County every year has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3% a year. So we are attracting several folks in this area. Back in 2012, we had a lot more farms, if you will. I should say bigger farms, bigger acreage of farms, as opposed to the 2017 census. So, you know, acre-wise, back then we had quite a bit. Today in 2017, there are more farms, believe it or not, and it's just because of subdividing. So what does that do? When you have subdivision going on and you have more demand for the crops that are being grown, either whether it's going to be hay or a cow or a couple horses or whatever you're going to be growing, that puts a big demand into water issues. And so here in Deschutes County, I'm working with 5 irrigation districts. That would be Three Sisters Irrigation District, Swally, Tumalo, Arnold, and COID. And I work with hand in hand with them with looking and doing outreach with their farmers and ranchers, their constituents out there in their districts. And there's a diversity. As you heard from Mike, you know, Arnold shut off. And so I'm working with a lot of folks down in Arnold Irrigation District that is looking for means for next go around with water, how we can make that water go a little bit farther than being shut off in you know, early in the season. TSID, Three Sisters Irrigation District, their pressurized water, that is the gem, if you will, what everybody tries to go to. And there are different issues there as well. It's more like irrigation water management. Swally Irrigation District and Tumalo Irrigation District, they're most of them are 95%, well, I should say a little bit more than that, 99% is sprinkler irrigated. But again, it's a little different over there in how they manage. TSID just this last month went on rotation and they've never done rotations before. So that's a whole different ball game for them. COID, working with them, they have issues dealing with flood irrigators. I happen to be one of them, so I can relate to, you know, the paradigm shift on that, and that is a whole different ball game there. So again, bottom line is when we start looking at land use, it's a lot of demand now because a lot more influx of people. So therefore, we have to look a little bit differently on how we're going to be managing that water. With that, we also look at, we're just not just because soil and water is in our name, we look at all resource concerns. So with this data from the 2017 census and all, we're also looking at other resources that affect landowners that may not be irrigated, maybe rangeland aspect when you're starting to look at what I call the panhandle, everything like Milliken East. And then we also have a large chunk, 77% is federally owned, which that's actually forested, but we also have a lot of forest owners, even though it's 10%, they're all interspersed within that forest zone. And as you know, we got drought, we got a lot of fires going on right now. And so that also happens to be a very high priority on our list. So if you look at the next slide that I'm gonna, that will come up here, these are the main resource concerns that we deal with a lot of private landowners with. Water quality, on-farm irrigation, or quantity on-farm irrigation systems. Those are the ones that are trying to improve their system so they're using less water, and we can hopefully get those saving water back into the system, into the rivers, into other users. Water quality is looking at runoff and leach of nutrients or sediments, and most of that I'm looking at is more in the northern part of the county. There are some aspects where we're starting to look at, the flood irrigation side, or folks that just don't know how to operate their irrigation systems, where we do have that runoff issues going in and threats that are going into either main canals, streams, or rivers. So again, that's irrigated aspect. The other one deals with plant condition, plant health and vigor. We start looking at that with more on the lines of forestry, where we have dog hair stands of our forests, mostly down south, but there are a lot what we're looking at in the Sisters area up around 242, Highway 242 area, and just right north of Black Butte. So we're looking at working with landowners there, and that's becoming a high priority. The other one deals with plant condition. What we look at is invasive weeds, and I don't know if you stopped by the old weed wagon. I was there a number of days helping out with the Deschutes County. That's a big priority of ours, not only in the forest area, but then general and on private lands. It's amazing what happens when folks let their ground go to, quote, weeds, if you will, because it has a big impact on runoff and leaching into our streams and rivers and all. So we kind of look at that. Wildlife habitat and our domestic animals, most of that deals with all resources or land uses that we look at. So we're looking at primarily fragmentation to a lot of upland, deer, rhythm range. And also we look at the fisheries as well, what's happening to the Deschutes and what types of work can we do with the Watershed Council hand in hand to do some restoration work. Domestic animals, as it says right there, is a lot of small farm confined feeding operations or just smaller operations that we look with animals that again won't cause a water quality problem. So the next slide that I'm going to show you is just kind of irrigation conveyance, water savings. That's really a misnomer. I really should say irrigation conveyance projects, because these are the projects currently or what we have done in the past. The first one that you see right there, that is the Bolton project. It's lateral H21, and that's hand in hand with COID. So we worked with Central Oregon Irrigation District, taking 1,800 feet of pipe, open ditch, and cutting it down to 980 feet. What this was actually a water quality project. It really wasn't a quantity project because of the flooding that happened around that area and the threats to well. And if that picture went up a little more north, it's just a stone throw away to the Crooked River. But again, we did manage to have some savings on that. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, it was somewhere around that ditch was 46% loss on that, and now that is in pipe. And so, you know, kudos on that one. We did more of a water quality, but for that saved water, that went back into the COID's system, which helped out tremendously. The next project that you'll see showing up, this is the Tower Ditch Feasibility Study. This is actually what it was a feasibility study. The Deschutes SWCD was granted a Oregon Water Resource Department grant to look at basically sleeving this project. The pipe itself, that yellow line, was actually it's an old pipeline that at first glance, when we started to do an analysis on that in a pipe scope, we thought it was steel, and believe it or not, it was an asbestos pipe. Back in the day, in the 1960s, they'd put a lot of this coated asbestos pipe in, which made it even more desirable to sleeve this thing. But where the 50% of the water loss was right there at the tower box. This tower box was a total nightmare for the 8 patrons on this project, and it leaked like a sieve. And it wasn't until 2 years ago, well, I should say, yes, 2 years ago, where that tower, basically the tower built up pressure in that water, built up water pressure in that tower, and then seeped out to the rest of the patrons. And what happened was a total failure on that tower. It actually fell apart because that was that old. The feasibility study, we designed actually part of that tower box. And with the help of the private landowners, they actually completed that tower box without any additional help for implementation. We actually gave them the plans and the fortitude to go ahead and do this. And it was really up to the landowners to really put this together. So what they did is they took away the 150 feet of that from the tower box back to the asbestos pipe, and they put that into HTP pipe with 4 or 5 turnouts to that. That was regulated, and with the help of BlackRock Engineering, they actually had how they could regulate that so everybody could at least on rotation get the proper amount of water on their property and irrigate their hayland. So that was an unforeseen total success. We were wanting to go and get some implementation on that, but the landowners took it.
Todd, I apologize for breaking in. We're running a little behind, and I have some farmers already asking about getting to some questions. I'm just going to ask you to hold for a minute so I can get to Kate and Phil. I apologize.
Sure, then I'll go really, really fast here. So the next one, the next slide that I'll show you is a G4. I'm not going to say too much about that. It's going to be put in really soon. Again, a lot of landowners. This is COIDs doing a lot of the work on this. We're doing the private land work. And then that other one that just showed up, this is the one that we're finishing up with a feasibility study. This is Arnold Irrigation District. Again, 8 landowners that will we're just finishing up the feasibility study, and we hope to get, funding for that next year. The next slide that I'll show you basically is real quick. Go ahead and shoot those out. This is what the SWCD really shines to. We really do a lot of work and education with OSU Irrigation District, COID, all the irrigation companies to do some outreach on what we can do for helping out private landowners on their irrigation needs. And so the next slide, oh, that's one of our things. Yep, is just our checkout, check out our website and all. But again, we're an entity that are boots on the ground. We're the, I guess, the go-to people. We know where to hook up to other funding sources. NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are really joined at the hips with those guys. They do a lot of our technical work, and we also help them out on a lot of their programs as well. So I will end with that and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And we'll make sure that we share these resources out after the presentations, after the panel with the other, with the recording, so that everybody can visit the websites and see the other resources available. Next, I'll introduce Kate Fitzpatrick, the Executive Director of the Deschutes River Conservancy. Kate became ED after spending 16 years with the DRC managing and directing programs to collaboratively restore stream flow in the Deschutes Basin. Kate has a bachelor's in geology from Colgate University and a master's in environmental studies from the University of Oregon. And Kate is a firm believer in the power of community to work together to find solutions to potentially divisive natural resource issues.
Thanks, Chantel. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'll be concise so we can get to the questions. Mostly, I'm really excited to hear from you all so we can help develop our programs in a way that work for small farmers. So I'm looking forward to that part of it. But just a brief history of the DRC. Our mission is to restore stream flow and water quality in the Deschutes Basin. But we're a little bit unique in that we were formed by the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, the irrigation districts, and the environmental community, and we do all of our business collaboratively. So we're trying to restore flows in the river, but we're trying to do that in a way that works for agriculture. And Shon and Mike and Todd did a great job of laying the context for the basin, and you heard a lot about COID trying to figure out how to make water available to other irrigation districts so that water can go back in stream. So in the Deschutes, the in-stream and the agricultural water is very interconnected. So we all have our hands in all of that. We have a long history of doing projects with the irrigation districts that put water in stream and that improve their operations. Those fall into two major buckets, water conservation and water marketing, and I'll just say a few words about those. We've always supported the large canal piping projects that Shon and Mike referred to, helping fund those and support those over time. And historically, a lot of the water savings went back to the Deschutes River and tributaries. We also have an on-farm conservation program in partnership, like Shon mentioned, with COID, and we're happy to work with other districts as well. We know that if you can reduce your demands on your farm, you can potentially increase your reliability, but you can also help solve other water problems in the basin. So our main strategy right now is kind of following the big pipe that's happening. And so, for example, COID's piping project this winter will put 30 cubic feet per second in stream via North Unit Irrigation District, like they described. And we're really focused on putting projects on the ground that pipe the smaller associated laterals and private laterals and rotations and help landowners improve their on-farm efficiency infrastructure so that we can get closer to that on-demand pressurized system and really help COID manage their water really tightly so we can help solve problems in the basin. And I'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities there. We, in that Smith Rock, Kingway, Terrebonne zone, I don't know how many farmers are in that area, but we have $2.6 million from the NRCS to do this work over the next 5 years. We recently got some money from the ARPA funds that the Deschutes County directs. We got that money, a total of $1.45 million to help with that on-farm work. And so 1 million of that is going to go to that Terrebonne geography, and there's 300,000 that is going to go to the Deschutes geography as a whole. And so if you're in Tumalo Irrigation District or Swally Irrigation District or any of the other districts, Arnold, get in touch with Todd. We're partnering with the SWCD on that, and get in touch with us, and we'll just start putting projects on the ground. I could let Shon talk about it, but I think they also have a low interest loan program that you could use to match some of that funding with to get those projects on the ground as a landowner. So we're really excited to get this on-farm work moving. There's just a lot of water to be saved, a lot of benefits for agriculture, a lot of benefits for the flows. Need to hear from you, how those programs work best for you. So looking forward to that. The last thing I'll mention is the water marketing bucket. We have an annual in-stream water leasing program with all of the irrigation districts. And if someone doesn't want to use their water or part of their water, like certain acres in a given year, we'll compensate you to leave that water in stream, and it protects your water as a year for beneficial use under water law. So that's a really good tool if you're a small landowner and you're moving things around, or there's, you know, some fields that you don't want to irrigate that year, or you're in transition. Please get in touch with us and get in touch with your district, and we can help facilitate that. We are also working with the districts, specifically COID and North Unit, on how do we provide incentives to maybe keep all of your acres irrigated, but use less in a given year, and how can we incentivize that so we can help that solve other problems. So these are the sort of some of the water marketing opportunities that relate to on-farm efficiency. We could potentially put that water in a bank where you still hold that water right, but in a certain year, if you're able to use less, we can, you know, get that water to junior districts and get that water back in stream. So I think that's my very quick overview of the programs that we have. But again, we would love to hear from you all that are out there on the ground farming and what kind of programs work well for you, so we can make those as effective as possible.
Thank you, Kate. And yeah, we'll jump into the first question with you in a moment regarding some of those things you hit on. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to introduce Phil Chang. Phil moved to Bend in 2004 and was elected to serve as Deschutes County Commissioner in 2020. He holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a master's of science from UC Berkeley, and also sits on the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative.
Thanks for that introduction, Phil. I'm just really glad to have a chance to speak with the High Desert Food and Farm Alliance today. When our community faces water challenges, farmers suffer some of the worst impacts. It's also true that within agriculture are some of our greatest opportunities to contribute to solutions in the basin. And I know it's hard to see during a drought year, but there is a tremendous untapped water supply for our basin, which is conservation. And you've already heard a whole bunch of the details around that from several of the other speakers. But you know, as a county commissioner, the county does not have a really specific role to play in water world. We don't have, you know, we don't have certain authorities. We don't operate infrastructure. But someone like myself, who is one of your elected officials, has the opportunity to kind of take in the big picture and lend support where they can, be that political support, be that cheerleading, be that sometimes applying funding to issues. And so when I talk about this huge untapped water supply that is available to us, I'd love, you know, I'd hope to be able to kind of give a little bit of the big picture on that, or just kind of summarize some of what you've already heard today. So there is a huge amount of the water in the Deschutes Basin is allocated to agriculture, and there are massive opportunities to conserve water within agriculture. As you've heard, we have a lot of leaky main and lateral canals to pipe. We have a lot of acres. There are a lot of acres that are being irrigated really efficiently, and then there's a lot of acres where we're not irrigating, or we're not applying water super efficiently, and there's huge opportunities for savings there. When you look at some of the reports and analyses that have been done, we could save hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water per year after implementing some of these conservation projects, and that can do a lot for our farmers with junior water rights that are tenuous, and that can do a lot for our river and our growing thirsty communities as well. The most important thing to understand about that, though, is that to realize those savings, we need collaboration and investment. We need a whole lot of historically warring factions to come together and support projects that'll benefit everyone. And I'm really glad the county is a member of the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. where that hard work of getting people on the same page and rowing in the same direction is happening. We also need to spend tens of millions of dollars to implement these water conservation projects so that we can meet more of the needs in the basin with the same amount or even less water in the future, because our water supplies, they are finite, and with climate change, they might be declining. Just recently, Kate briefly mentioned this, I was really glad that the county was able to contribute $1.45 million to on-farm efficiency and lateral canal piping projects with the Deschutes River Conservancy and the Soil and Water Conservation District and the Irrigation districts last week. So that's, before we jump right into the question portion of the evening, that's just a little bit of high-level summary I'd like to provide. We have huge opportunities to solve these problems through collaboration and investment and a lot of water conservation work, which will provide relief and a reliability and predictability to our farmers, to our river, and to our thirsty cities. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. We'll move now into the prepared questions. I'm going to ask a panelist, kind of assign you to each question, but please know as a panelist not assigned to that question, you're open to weigh in. Annie is taking questions right now from farmers and ranchers who are putting them into the chat or in messages to her. So if you haven't asked a question, she is prioritizing and moving those questions into the lineup as well. So I'll start with a question for you, Kate. There are many interest groups currently working on the water issue in Central Oregon. How have small food producing farmers and ranchers historically been represented in these conversations?
Yeah, thanks, Chantal. Honestly, we have on our board 2 irrigation seats, and currently that is Central Oregon Irrigation District and North Unit Irrigation District, a manager and a board member, respectively. And so from our point of view, it's a little bit aggregate. Like, we don't have a ton of direct representation from small farmers, and we would welcome that. So I know that you all have expressed interest in the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. I think that'd be great for you to get involved and represent that voice. I think we have some exposure to small farmers just through our in-stream leasing program. A lot of people that participate are small farmers. And then, of course, some of the on-farm efficiency work we're getting into. But that's honestly, the on-farm efficiency work is a bit new for us. And so we're very interested in connecting with those small farmers that have needs, and again, understanding how to best help meet those needs.
Great. Question number 2, this is for Shon. Across the West, drought has become more common and more severe. As farmers, ranchers, and other stakeholders learn to manage increased water scarcity, what do you think the future of water use in Central Oregon will look like?
We're probably not going to stop using water. And I think we all maybe can agree that, global warming is a real thing. Water may come here, but it's going to start coming in a different fashion. It's not going to come as snow. It's going to come as rain. And that's a problem for our system in how we use it for irrigation. So I believe we just really need to stay the course of conservation and doing piping projects and water marketing projects, so that when that stuff starts to happen, like this year, we're prepared for it and we can operate much more efficiently.
Great. Next question for Todd. What can small scale farmers and ranchers do to become more resilient as they are faced with this new reality of water shortages? And what are some of the obstacles to on-farm efficiencies in 2021?
I think the simplest thing that a person can do or small farms is just basic irrigation water management. Just looking at the soils, swapping out your nozzles every 2 to 3 years, looking at the soils, adjusting your timing when you're irrigating, irrigation, then doing some irrigation upgrades. If you're flood, going to sprinkler. You know, those are pretty expansive when you start doing that. Or for very small drip, you're probably right in the ballpark there of doing the best that you can. Some of the folks with big guns out there, I'd be thinking twice in using those. Those are a very waste of water due to evaporation. And so I would really start taking a look at how you can make different irrigation systems more efficient. And then of course, the last would be conversion from taking your on-farm delivery and putting it into a pipe, or talking to your neighbors. And if you're on a small lateral, maybe talking to them, collaborate, and getting SWCD help to organize that and maybe put it into a pipe. Obstacles is what you're saying is exactly, there is an expense to that, but there is some overcome too. I think we are looking at some opportunities with, you know, some of the ARPA funds, also some of the other programs that Kate mentioned and Shon from COID has, that could probably assist private landowners in addressing or helping out and giving some leverage to get those major projects done.
Just as a quick note on that, so CYD does have a Pass the POD program for cleaning ditches, piping ditches, and then on top of that, we also put some money into a bank. So we're going to be, we actually are offering low interest loans. One of the biggest barriers for our people doing on farm is funding, finding funding in a timely manner. So I think that's a really great opportunity for our folks to access that money and get some projects going.
Thanks. And a follow-up question that came in, excuse me, as an irrigator who has operated professional farms on floods, wheel lines, and drip, can you help me understand why in such times someone would remain on flood irrigation given its inefficiency? Are there pros other than it being easier than moving wheel line? Annie's having me kick that one to you, Todd.
Yes, it's convenient. I don't have any power costs. I don't have you know, any infrastructure I have to deal with. That's the reason why nobody's converting over. As a flood irrigator myself, that's one of the things that I'm looking at. But having said that, a flood irrigator has a ton of labor that goes along with that when they have to move water. And that's where the key is, because people don't realize you have to pay yourself. And there is a trade-off on that. Plus, as water gets more monitored and measured, the amount of water for a flood irrigation is going to not be as much carry water, if you will, to go through your field. So you're going to have to force to do something. In my case, I'm already looking at putting in a sump and in a pump, so at least I can utilize that water more efficiently and get across my whole field. But bottom line, it's convenience. It's I don't have to pay anything. That's unfortunately that's what it is.
All right, question for Mike. What incentives or disincentives currently exist for senior water right holders to conserve water for junior right holders?
I think Todd just covered all of them
Okay.
just a second ago, but as far as incentives go, you know, the soil and water conservation districts, USDA, NRCS, there's all types and kinds of funding that's available to incentivize flood irrigators like Todd to go out and buy a pump and a wheel line or a small pivot or something other than flood irrigate. And North Unit still has flood irrigators, and you know, people kind of frown upon that, but if flood irrigating can be very efficient if you have the proper land leveling, you have the proper soil and the proper cropping patterns. It can be very efficient. It's not always, we call it furrow irrigation, not flood irrigation. So it can be very, very efficient. So there's plenty of incentives out there for folks. ODA has it. The Bureau of Reclamation has Water Smart grants that are available to people. So if people want to do a little bit of homework or even reach out to Todd or the irrigation districts, we know where to find that money. And our farmers have been very successful over the years, as Todd mentioned, in securing water with the assistance of the Soil and Water Conservation District. All of our piping to date has been in partnership with our SWCD. And so it's worked out very well. So I would encourage folks to reach out to those organizations that I just mentioned, and they know where to find the money and the incentives to get this type of work done. The disincentives, as Todd said, it can be expensive, can be time consuming. You have to build infrastructure. There's power costs that come along with it. There's, I guess, for every reason to do it, there's a reason not to do it. But for the most part, in today's society, you know, I think most people want to do the right thing, and you know, better management of the water on the farm, whether it's a big farm or a small farm, really is a responsibility of the person, you know, of being a good steward of that resource. So again, if there's plenty of opportunities out there to take advantage of, to get projects done on the ground, and even to maintain your sprinklers and your delivery systems. PGE, Pacific Power, they have rebate programs. CEC has rebate programs where you can have your sprinkler heads and your gaskets and your nozzles replaced, and you get reimbursed for doing that. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. It's just a matter of asking the right people.
Thank you. For Shon Ray, how are irrigation districts moving forward with piping projects in the face of patron lawsuits and pushback?
Oh, you tricked me. Will you say that again?
Sorry, this was one from the audience.
That's okay, that's okay.
How are irrigation districts moving forward with piping projects in the face of patron lawsuits and pushback?
So for COID, our current project, it's in a rural area. There's a lot more support for it. Obviously, there's some piping going to be going on in town with Arnold, and maybe some of you have seen a lot of pushback on that. You know, you just have to stay the course. For us, it's, you know, we try to be transparent. You just work the problem. There's really no way around it that people are going to get upset, and it's just a natural reaction. So we, like I said, we just sort of stay focused on the end goal and try to educate people why we're doing it. And, you know, there's always opportunity costs. You know, piping is something's going to give. You know, there's not going to be water for wildlife. There may be some trees that die that are along the canal. So there are some, you know, unintended consequences for those choices. We have to think really, I guess, holistically about our entire region and basin on what the best use of that water is, because something's going to have to give. It's either going to be the humans are going to give, the wildlife is going to have to give, or, you know, the farmers are going to have to give. And so, you know, our goal is to try to even it out. You know, it's not to kill trees or you know, get rid of people's water features. It's really trying to just be responsible with the resource that we have.
All right, this is another new question. Annie has labeled this for Kate or Phil, so whoever feels more comfortable starting. What are some opportunities in water law in 2021 in Oregon and moving forward to enhance water banking for longer periods? And would longer water banking periods be beneficial or welcome?
I can, wow, good question. I'm not exactly sure what longer water banking periods mean, so I might ask for a follow-up on that. But yeah, I mean, generally, we're working with a pretty rigid water law system that was set up over 100 years ago. And the benefits of that system is that it provides certainty. You know that if you're a senior water user, you get water in a water scarce situation. And if you're a junior, it's kind of the hand you were dealt. But as a basin, we're really trying to work together and collaborate. And so sometimes some of the things we've talked about, like sharing water between COID and North Unit, can be cumbersome under Oregon water law, particularly on a temporary basis even. And so I think those are some things that if we could bank water, you know, there's a use it or lose it doctrine in water law where you have to use your water once every 5 years. There's a misconception that you have to use all of your water. You don't have to use all of your water. You have to put it to a beneficial use. And so if you can do that with less of your total allocation, we would love to see ways to be able to, you know, move that sort of extra water to North Unit in exchange for the river flows in the winter. There's no mechanism under state water law to do that besides just, you know, not leaving it in the river, but there's a lot of complexity there. I'm sorry, not taking out so much out of the river, but it would be nice to be able to actually direct that water to North Unit, for example. Can't do that through state water law, can do that through agreement, but there's a little bit of risk there, and we want to make sure the districts don't feel any risk. And so there's just some policy innovations that would allow us to move water more flexibly in a given year between districts into the river. We would love for that to be a water bank. So that water banking concept is a nice one where the districts can have control over what happens, but there's more flexibility in the system. So it's a kind of a complex topic, and sorry not to have a direct answer, but we think as a basin, if we could go to, you know, Salem, go to the legislature and say, we want to do these set of things to meet all of our goals together, and it's broadly supported, that we could have some increased flexibility under water law in the Deschutes Basin that could serve us well.
And Phil, there was a follow-up question that touches on some of what Kate alluded to, but do you have any other state policies you believe need to change in order to distribute water more equitably through the different irrigation districts, if you have anything to add on?
So, I mean, at the policy level, at the really high policy level, the two things we're trying to accomplish are conservation and sharing. And so there was a whole bunch of discussion just now about incentives, incentives to do conservation projects. And when we use the word incentives, oftentimes it comes down to financial things. You know, like, we can give this person a little bit of money to implement their project, to buy, you know, to cost share on their equipment or things like that. But I think we should look a little bit more broadly at that than that. So incentives, you know, like financial incentives are one thing, but you know, there are more things than money that motivate people to do something good for their basin, for their fellow farmers, or for the river. And so when we talk about policy, that's what that's one area I think we really need to look is how do we motivate people? You know, incentives are a piece of that, but how do you motivate people to pursue conservation? You know, Todd and Mike talked a little bit about, you know, that the financial incentives that people might have, but I think one of the really big disincentives that people face is that if you're a senior water rights holder with a lot of water, if you don't do conservation, you're still probably going to get your water. And I mean, that's, you know, the fact that you can just sort of you know, being passive is a pretty good fallback to just kind of keep getting the water that you need. That's not a good motivation in my mind. And you know, to change that, I mean, you really got to get into water rights and you know, Kate was starting to get into that a little bit, but I really think that one of the most untapped motivations that we have is people's desire to be good neighbors, good stewards, you know, to contribute to something that's bigger than themselves, because you have a whole lot of farmers, you have a whole lot of irrigation districts who are, again, sitting on a massive potential water supply through conservation. And if all those people knew what great things could be accomplished with that water that they're conserving, I think more people would make the effort. And especially if you combine that with, hey, you know, you've got a lot of water rights, you're flood irrigating right now, like you don't have to do anything to continue to get an adequate water supply, but you could do good things and we're going to help you cover the cost of that. That's when you suddenly get, you know, I think you suddenly get people really moving on that stuff. But the other policy area, and Kate was just alluding to this, is that it's really hard to move water around. So if you conserve water, you don't necessarily get to choose like, oh, I'm going to conserve this water and then I'm going to, you know, transfer this to my farmer friend in North Unit Irrigation District. There's you know, a lot of bureaucratic layers to get through to move your water to the place that you want it to go to. So the other real area for policy work in my mind is to create that kind of that flexibility. Kate used that word, flexibility, you know, in transferring and sharing and moving water around to the places where we all agree we need it.
Shon?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add, I think it's not widely known that on-farm conservation does not equal water in the river necessarily. If people are being, you know, using on-farm conservation methods, they may just use all of their water more efficiently. And if they don't use all of the water, it does not create a reliable source of water that we can transfer over to Mike. Yeah, they may not use all of their water, but it's not something that North Unit or junior users can rely on, and they need reliable water. They need to know how much water they can allocate, which is why we are really focusing on mainline piping, because that's where we have more control and we can actually produce water that is reliable for Mike, until we can get some of these other policy things changed, where when people do conservation, they can use, you know, half of their water or 3/4 of their water and then be able to transfer or you know, reliably give that water to junior users. So thanks.
Thank you. Whoops. Sorry, we're shifting questions around here. We have another new question. This one will be for Todd. From a Tumalo Irrigation District farmer that implements integrated water management practices and upgrades, what does the farmer do when the water is cut off other than tap into domestic wells? How do we recover lost crops, wages, FSA payments, etc.?
Wow. That one I'm not too sure if I can answer, because you have, I mean, if you're already efficient and then you're relying off of a well system, or how do you get, how can things be alleviated? Yeah, Farm Services Agency, I guess, would be, the deal, the place to go, because they would have disaster relief. But that's a tough question. I really don't have a great answer for you for that. I'm sorry.
Anybody else have anything to weigh in on that one? And I'm happy to repeat it if needed.
You repeat it, Chantel?
Yeah.
Please.
From a Tumalo Irrigation District farmer that implements integrated water management practices and upgrades, what does the farmer do when the water is cut off other than tap into domestic wells? How do we recover lost crops, wages, FSA payments, etc.?
Yeah, that's so. So we actually requested from the state, when I say we, North Unit, financial relief or financial assistance for our farmers that are going to experience exactly what you just mentioned, where you have the most efficient systems, you run out of water, you have crops in the field, they're going to die, but you still have 100% of your overhead costs. Still got to make a mortgage payment, you have equipment payments, you might be leasing ground, you still have to pay for fuel and fertilizer. I mean, there's still a lot of costs that are involved, and we're hopeful through working with the state that we can find some funding to help bridge those losses, at least for a year or two, until we get through this drought cycle and water becomes more available and more prevalent. So there is no fix really for that, in my opinion, other than going out and trying to find some aid for the people that have suffered through this.
Thanks, Mike. And a little bit more specifically, somebody asked if there's any discussion on the state level about creating some sort of CFS leveler during a state declared drought. For example, every district drops to 3 CFS or lower when drought is declared. And that one's for you, Mike, if you have a.
Hey, that's a new one to me. I have not heard of a leveler like that. And again, I think, it would have to be voluntary unless water law was changed, because as others have mentioned, the hierarchy and how water rights are distributed is 100+ years old, and that's the way it's managed today. But that is a novel concept, and that I appreciate that.
Annie, I don't know if you had somebody specific for this next question. Can you help us understand how the HCP connects/ties all the irrigation districts together? What would happen if one district does not meet HCP guidelines? Would it impact our whole basin? And is there potential for NUID to pull out of the HCP? So helping us understand how the HCP connects and ties, and then what are the effects if one district doesn't meet guidelines?
I'll let Shon tackle that. I'm just kidding. So the HCP is all the irrigation districts in Central Oregon, and it's managed through the Deschutes Basin Board of Control. We were issued incidental take permits in December that allows us to operate our districts in a otherwise legal manner, and through those operations we happen to kill, or the term is take, a species, then we're protected from lawsuits, basically. The piece of that, if North Unit were to walk away from the HCP or any other district for that matter, we call it a poison pill clause. So if North Unit walks away, we have to go out and pay for all the studies that would have to be redone based on our portion of the HCP and what's required of us in the HCP. We would have to go out and obtain protection or coverage, because if we're out there without protection for taking a endangered species, that comes with criminal and/or civil results. So if I, for example, convinced the board that we needed to step away from the HCP, and somebody from, it could be anywhere, from Florida, found out and came after me with civil and criminal penalty lawsuits, I could end up in prison. So there's other, aside from just the what you see at face value from the HCP, there is a lot behind the HCP that folks really don't know about. So it's not as easy as just saying, yeah, this isn't working out for us, we're going to step away. There's a lot that comes along with stepping away from the HCP.
Okay, how feasible is switching to dry farming practices, and what support is there in our area for dry farming? And that's for Todd.
Yeah, that's been a question that always comes up that we've been fielding, and it's starting to become more and more. We do the Deschutes SWCD. We start looking at ways that we can utilize some of these small grant types of funding to do some of those conversions. The Natural Resources Conservation Service, they start looking at some of what they call enhancements, which is actually through the Conservation Stewardship Program that actually does that. So that is a program that in the Central Oregon area really hasn't been tapped a lot, if you will, but I know it's starting to become quite prevalent for NRCS. So so there are some mechanisms involved. It depends upon the situation that you have. Usually I'd be more than happy to go on out, take a look at what the conversion is going to be like and see if it fits within some of the programs we have, and also to see if that would fit very well with NRCS's Conservation Stewardship Program.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. I have one question for, I'll kick to the whole panel, but I just want to reintroduce the High Desert Food and Farm Alliance. We're here in Central Oregon. We work with small to medium scale farmers and ranchers, and we do not play a large role in water because there are so many organizations who have been doing this work day in and day out for far more years than I've been in Central Oregon. So very grateful to everybody for your time today and for your expertise and for your willingness to collaborate and share resources. And we hope to be able to connect you to all the farmers and ranchers specifically that we work with throughout the Tri-County area and really build collective resources so that we can help them weather these next couple of years that I'm assuming will follow a similar pattern. I'm just going to have everybody just let us know what makes you most optimistic about water use in the Deschutes Basin, and end with some optimism.
I'll start. I think it's really quite amazing that we actually have assigned HCP. It is not a common thing, and that we have a plan to balance out the water. We have a plan. It will work. So we just need to stay the course. And I think a lot of people don't understand that we've been working really hard daily. I mean, that's probably 80% of my job is working on conservation and making sure that we can, supply water for everybody's needs.
I can go next. I was just really struck listening to Shon and Mike give the introduction, and Todd, that how well we all work together. And when I hear them speak, it's like what I would say, and we're coming from different perspectives. And so I'm just really optimistic because there's so many amazing partners working together to solve these water problems together. And I think that's a really unique thing. And, playing off of what Phil said, with the, the right investment and the right culture, we can absolutely meet our water needs for rivers and for communities into the future.
Yeah, I'll go next. I echo that. It's just amazing, the partnership that Kate's just saying. The people that SWC now D is working with now are just, phenomenal folks. And the enthusiasm, the optimism, and the programs that they come with and the talent that they come with is unbelievable. And reciprocating on that is the landowners that are also coming to these entities now that are, I don't know about you guys, but my phone's buzzing off the hook, that just want to, do wonders for, what they can do to improve their system. Even an IWM plan is just the unbelievable. But I think optimism there. I think people see the need, they see the partnership, and they're willing to take that dive to do the next step for conservation.
I'd have to say, for me, the resiliency that I see in our farmers and during tough times, it would be easy for a lot of people just to throw in the towel and say I've had enough. But the people I work with and have worked with over the years here in North Unit are a group of great people for the most part. There's always a few out there that are not always so great to deal with, but that comes with the territory. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to work in a basin where there is so much collaboration and effort going on to do the right thing, compared to other districts and basins that you hear about in the news quite often that are struggling even with ample supplies of water. So I just appreciate the opportunity to have worked here in the basin over the years.
It takes more than money to get stuff done. Money isn't everything, but money can be a really good indicator when there's something big and important going on. And there is a phenomenal amount of investment going into the Deschutes Basin, into the work that you've heard described today. And that to me is an indicator that you have, as Kate said, you have all these amazing partners doing this work. And as Mike said, that you have all these resilient, resourceful farmers who want to do all these great things and who are calling Todd. We know that these tens of millions of dollars that are coming into the basin are going into projects that have been years in the making, are well thought out, and are going to be successful when implemented. And it is a really hard thing in a drought year like this to be patient and wait for those projects because we really need them now. But knowing that those projects are moving, that those dollars are going into pipe and to sprinklers and all of those things, that does give me hope for the years to come.
Well, thank you again, Shon Ray, Phil Chang, Mike Britton, Todd Peplin, and Kate Fitzpatrick for your time and your commitment every day. We will be in touch with everybody who participated in this call. We'll be sending out a recording so you can revisit answers. We'll do our best to gather all the resources that were mentioned by various people and get those shared out in a cohesive fashion. And we hope to be bringing more resources and opportunities like this. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks,
Thanks for the
everybody.
opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for